The courage to stand. Election day 2016, I had an unexpected encounter with the past. Early that morning, an elderly man was wheeled into the voting center by his son. While his son processed paperwork with one of my fellow election judges, I worked up the courage and asked, "If you don't mind me asking, sir, what was the first election you voted in?" I was amazed to discover he had first voted for FDR in 1944. The son then explained to me that his father had served in World War II as a bombardier, just like one of my heroes, Louis Zamperini. As a student of the 40s and someone who highly admires America's World War II veterans, I was incredibly excited and honored to talk with this man. Discussing his life, and more importantly, watching him vote, carefully going over each issue and candidate with his son, deeply impacted me and showed me that history is made up of individuals who inspire us to live worthy of their sacrifices. Sadly, many in my generation have been swindled out of a love of history by being told that our national story is merely a dusty collection of names, dates, and facts. Yet history is inherently story-driven. It paints a picture spanning millions of lives, capturing with sweeping strokes their struggles, loves, sacrifices, and joys. Those of my peers who complain history is boring overlook the most captivating facet of history, the human element. They forget the blood-spattered fields of Gettysburg, the awestruck gazes of immigrants as they passed Lady Liberty, the fury that swept the nation after Pearl Harbor, and the celebrations across the U.S. as Americans landed on the moon. In those days, Americans treasured their national heritage. Schools required students to memorize famous speeches, and parents told their children stories about American heroes. Young Americans were raised in a society which valued honor, bravery, gratitude, and character. Today, the opposite is true. Families are more disconnected than ever, and my generation is addicted to novelty, the latest YouTube video or newest Instagram post. But the promise of America's history to instill within us the character to act and the courage to stand is as strong as ever. If we sought it out, we teens would be amazed by our findings. We would read Thomas Paine's declaration, quote, "The harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph." These words sustained the revolutionary cause through freezing winters as America's barefoot troops clung to the hope of freedom. We would discover the courage of journalist Ida B. Wells, a former slave who wrote articles attacking the savageness of lynching. We would be inspired by the compassion of Jane Addams, whose 19th century settlement houses sheltered immigrants' families and protected thousands of children from the horrors of the streets. We would be overwhelmed by the story of Louis Zamperini, who, as a bombardier, crashed in the Pacific, surviving the sharks and 2 years of Japanese torture to later return and forgive his captors. And we would be moved by America's generosity, from rebuilding Germany and Japan to supplying Afghani civilians with food. We, the United States, have spearheaded the fight to save the planet from Nazi genocide, communist mastery, and Middle Eastern jihad. Young Americans would learn that when the world is brought to its knees, it looks to America for deliverance. And even from America's failures, such as the Fugitive Slave Act and the Trail of Tears, young people would learn from the past and realize that these mistakes are not unique to America. Every nation has experienced slavery, corruption, and oppression. What is uniquely American is giving everyone, no matter their race, color, or creed, the right to live freely and become whatever they want to become. As I'm challenged in class by the false narratives smearing America, I turn to one person, my grandfather, who I call Uppachin, and who always sets me straight. Uppachin immigrated to the United States in 1973 with his young family and only $8 in his pocket. He always smiles and explains, "In America, you are free, and only here in America can anyone achieve anything." America's history is our hope for the future, because when it is studied, it instills within my generation the character to act. Yet, as Captain Steve Rogers says, America doesn't hand you things on a silver platter. Sometimes, all she offers is hope. I believe that as young Americans learn the history of this great nation, we will become humble, grateful, courageous, and generous. And that hope will give us the courage to stand. Thank you.